Thank you, Reese. I'm humbled to address such a distinguished audience here, and I'll try to do my best to fulfill some of the expectations. So yes, I will try to talk about gifts, corruption, and philanthropy in an ambiguous world. I'll start a little bit philosophical, but I try then to make it very concrete and practical at the end, and I'm very happy to answer questions. So I'll try to limit it about 30 minutes. Now, the first thing is gifts. The logic of the gift. Gifts, in my opinion, are constituting any community. And gift practices is something that's very common in an Asian context, in a Latin American context, less in an Australian and a European context. I would always say I'm an Asianized European. And the reason for that is, being originally from Europe, having spent my half professional life in Asia, I'm definitely influenced by what Asia is offering in terms of culture. And I'm very grateful to this university because this university offers me the intellectual home to explore issues which I have seen and which I'm still continue to feel, to deal with in an Asian context, more particularly Indonesia, Singapore, and Southeast Asia. So back to the gifts, I indeed say that gift practices do constitute a community. In fact, etymologically, community, which is derived from the Latin communis, communera, means with gifts. So any community, anthropologically speaking, is based on giving. I mean, even in this country, if you go to a party or a dinner, you better show up with a bottle of wine or a small gift, isn't it? All right? So it's not that uncommon in our own culture. The more so in a culture like China or Indonesia, which is much more relationship-based than transactional, which is more our Western culture. So gifts is something which is almost normal. However, I like to emphasize that gifts are not that straightforward as we may think. If we talk about gifts, usually we believe a gift is free. You don't expect any return, not immediately at least, right? So you generally try to give. Gifts are often, you know, correlated or seen as an expression of generosity. Now, Valentine's Day is coming up soon. I mean, I'm a little bit younger than most of you, although you should really ask the youngsters. I mean, if you give this kind of flower to a nice lady or a diamond ring, I'm from Antwerp, right? The question is, does that lady or does the person you're giving something to, does that person feels bound to reciprocate or not? Or is it really free as an expression of your acknowledgement? Well, although most gifts are being given, and in French we say hors de prix, beyond price, they're priceless. Any gift somehow contains a price. It has a value. So back to my example of the Valentine gift, even the rose you give to somebody is an expression. Now, despite the fact that gifts may be free, quote unquote, more and more you can argue that gifts contain three obligations. In any social context, which then lead to just community. And the three obligations are to give. If you want to establish any relationship, you have to give something. The person who receives then will say, yes, I don't mind to have a relationship with you, whatever kind of relationship. Because if the person do not want a relationship with you, he will give or she will give back the diamond ring. I mean, some people may not. They may just put it in their pocket. But usually, if you do not want that relationship, you will not receive the gift. And then there's a third obligation, that kind of obligation to reciprocate. And that is what the Asians are very good at in business. They know by giving something to you and you receiving it, you are morally obliged to reciprocate that gift. Now, to complicate the matter, and I'll be brief, gifts are not only characterized by that kind of reciprocity, at least in a social context, but moreover, gifts are often ambiguous. Why? Well, let me give you an example. If you go to a dinner and you bring that bottle of wine, assume that bottle of wine is a $10 or an $8 bottle, they will say, "Whoa, what a cheap guy." Right? Now, if you then come up with a bottle of $150, you say, "What a freak, what a show off." That's not good either. So meaning, you have to balance that. It's the art of giving. Meaning, a gift has two elements. It is like, as Plato, and allow me to be philosophical for a second, like Plato said, it's a pharmacon. It's a medicine. And a medicine can cure you, but it can also poison you. And the same in any gift. A gift is a way to share, but it's also an expression of trying to achieve competitiveness or superiority. Because it is a reflection of who you are. And so that is what makes it so difficult. Gifts are ambiguous. Let me take a step back. In order to constitute a community or any relationship, I said, you have to give. That first gift, that first step, is indeed quite, quote-unquote, free. It is as an expression of, if I may spiritually call this love. You really have to trust the other person because there's no guarantee at that point. That's the first gift. It's a unilateral gift. But it's very rare because most gifts in any social context are reciprocal. Okay? As I said, because they are ambiguous, that makes it so difficult. That brings me to my second point, corruption. Corruption, and more particularly bribery, is, if you like, the antithesis of the ultimate generous gift. The ultimate generous gift can never turn into a bribe. But because most gifts are reciprocal, characterized by these three obligations of reciprocity, at that time it is not so difficult anymore to turn a reciprocal gift into a bribe. Why? Because the commonality between gifts and bribes is that element of reciprocity. The major difference, though, between a bribe and a reciprocal gift is the element of secrecy. A gift, any gift, is given in an open, non-secretive manner. Even if the Japanese are wrapping it so beautifully, or Europeans, or Australians for that matter, it's given on the table, not under the table. A bribe is always under the table. It's always secretive. And I can talk about the whole issue and the question, are Asians culturally more prone to corruption or not? Let me give you a very brief example. I didn't meant to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. As I said, I'm a fan of Asia, okay? So my answer to the question, are Asians culturally more prone to corruption? Yes and no. That's a typical academic answer. Let me be practical as a businessman I used to be, and still am, I guess. Yes, they are, but only a part of their cultural environment, or should I say, their leaders only. And what I'm trying to say with this is simple. At the height of the crisis, in 97, 98, 99, I was working as a financial advisor for the debt bank in Indonesia. And a lot of the bad debt was due to corruption. Some people would argue 50% and 50% due to the economic crisis. And the NPLs, the non-performing loans of banks in Asia, and in this particular case dealing with Indonesia, were from 20 to 70%, which means virtually bankrupt, because bigger as the car, capital adequacy ratio, right? However, and this is the point I'm trying to make, if you look to the NPLs, non-performing loans of so-called provincial banks in Indonesia, which mainly were giving microfinance to poor farmers, the NPLs at the height of the crisis were surprisingly only 2.5%. What does that mean? The poor people, the farmers, which constitute 70% of the population in Indonesia, similarly in Thailand, 60%, similarly in Philippines. The majority of those people who obtained small loans from those microfinance companies were paying back their loans. The rice was more expensive. Everything was more expensive. There was a crisis going on, but those people were paying back. So people will argue, well, most of those loans were given to the females. Apparently, statistically and empirically, it's been proven that females are slightly more honest as men. So, but the point then is, and that's answering the question, the majority of people, those Indonesians, Thai, Philippines, were morally or institutionally, or let's say pressed by the community to pay back their loan. Whether they were generally more honest, I don't know. But I do see that they did pay back. Whereas the leaders, and I will not name names, okay? I've worked for big corporates. These people, because of the power they had, and because of the institutional voids, the institutional weaknesses in those countries, in those emerging countries, they take advantage of it. They know almost at beforehand that they will not pay back those loans they obtain from the bank because they're mates, they're their friends. They give a call to the director. And you know what? I've seen this. They obtain loans. It's changing today, though. I'm speaking here of the 90s. They give a call to the director. They obtain the $100 million. It's as easy as a 1 million. In fact, it's easy to obtain 100 million and 1 million. And the due diligence is done afterwards in order to comply with the rules of the game. Because they're mates. That's how it did go 10, 15 years ago. It are those leaders in Asia who are responsible, in my opinion, because they consciously took advantage of the weaknesses institutionally. So, as I said, coming back to the subject, corruption and bribery, yes, those powerful elites take advantage of the system and therefore are more prone to corruption. I may, later on, if time allows me, I have a nice mathematical equation where I can nicely show you why and why not people would bribe or be corrupt. And that brings me to the last subject, or the third concept, philanthropy. Philanthropos, love for humankind. We all believe in any religion that giving constitutes meaning. In fact, it makes us happier. And so philanthropy is, again, that kind of expression, it's a gift. And ultimately, it's that kind of generous gift. But similarly, philanthropy can be very ambiguous. And especially corporate philanthropy. The tax system, in fact, is helping and is kind of a subsidy system for philanthropy. Partially can be deducted. So I'm a big proponent for philanthropy, but at the same time we should be careful about the meaning and the PR behind philanthropy, especially if you expose it too much. And let me give you another example. In '99, some of the tobacco companies were giving away $75 million for charity. Unfortunately, they were advertising it with a campaign of $100 million, and people found out. Meaning, it undermined the essence of the gift. And so, philanthropy can turn into a public relation disaster if we're not careful. So, I guess the ultimate generosity is difficult to achieve. The two forces of humankind is self-interest and care for others. And again, it is this ambiguity that we will never be able to avoid. The question is how we will deal with that ambiguity, whether that's politically, or whether that is in negotiation, or whether that's culturally, or whether that is in our own community. I think that's the challenge we face. And so today, in my own work, I'm very focused on cooperation and how businesses need to cooperate to face the daunting challenges we have at our hands today. Pure competition, I think, is important to become more effective. And being a pure altruist is naive. In fact, I learned from Martin Novak, an evolutionary biologist, that cooperation is based on certain kind of altruism that is conditional. And that's where reputation plays a role. In a sense, as long as mathematically you have 37.86% people who are willing to share and to be givers, and as long as you are aware that there always will be defectors and free riders in a society, as long as you have that small number, the society, the community has a chance to survive and indeed cooperate, and indeed, and that's policy making, think about common good. Because any corporation today cannot just look at pure self-interest only anymore. Profit is important. We cannot without in any corporation, but pure maximization of profit may not be sufficient to sustain the system. And so the challenge we have at hands is really, okay, understanding the gift, understanding the issues and the seduction of corruption, and the importance of charity. And by the way, allow me to say, it's quite interesting that empirically, the US, UK, and Australia give about 1.5 to 2.1% of the disposable income to charity, individually. Not the corporations, but individually. Which is about the same as the Muslims in the zakat do, which is about 2.5%, by the way, which is etymologically and anthropologically related to the tzedakah, the Jewish community. So all religious and all communities had that kind of similar gift practice system, which we call charity. So it's not uncommon. It's just a question of, again, how will we deal with the ambiguity? And what I really hope is, and let me conclude with that, and this is based on a study by Adam Grant, basically, givers, they advance the world. Takers advance themselves and hold the world back. And again, empirically has been proven that conditional givers, not naive altruists, but conditional givers in business and anywhere are most of the time the winners of the game. And on that note, I would like to thank you, and please feel free to ask me any question. Oh, okay. All right. So the question is the model I was referring to on corruption. So the model is a simple one. Is if you call X the corrupt amount, okay, and G is standing in this case for the corrupt of a government official. I didn't elaborate on that, but usually corruption is being defined as private gain from public office. Because most of the time, it are public officials who have monopoly power over the other party and are not necessarily accountable for that, what they're doing. They can take advantage of that agency in which they are placed and deviate from the fact of contact they have. So what is the benefit for a government official? It's basically the bribe he receives. And by the way, in bribery and corruption, you always have two people to dance the tango. It's not just the one who receives the bribe, it's also somebody who is to give the bribe. So it is X, which is the absolute amount of the bribe, minus, and that's the important one, minus 3 generic constraints. And the constraints are what I call reputation. The reputation that can be damaged as a result of that bribe. And an additional constraint is norms, whether they're social norms or moral norms, whatever they are, religiously inspired or secular, it doesn't matter. Norms will play a role in this. And last but not least, what I call the legal system, LXY, okay? And then you have the other part of the equation, the other person who's dancing the tango, which I call here P, the production guy, the businessman, who is paying the bribe. Now what is his gain? He will be able to produce, because he gets a favor for producing whatever or serving the government. So I call this price quality minus cost quantity, just the basic Cobb-Douglas function, just the basic, you know. But for that person, the bribe is a tax or is a cost, so I have to deduct it. Minus the same thing here. His reputation or her reputation can be damaged, the norms, and then the legal system. Now, let me just try to summarize and try to simplify the whole thing. Jokingly, I could say, if you take the first derivative of this, you can optimize your bribe. Okay, but it doesn't work like that, so it's not the reason why I'm doing this. The point is, let's look at this first factor. If reputation is of no interest or wouldn't affect the politician or government official, then unfortunately, which is happening quite often in Asia, this is close to 0. So I ignore this. Reputation, unfortunately, for those people do not matter. Okay? Now, if you say, listen, you're a good Muslim or a good Christian or a good Buddhist or a good Jew, whatever it is, you may practice that privately, but once you get out of the mosque or the church or the synagogue or whatever, you're apparently in business, and that there seems to be other rules. So unfortunately, and let me be provocative here for a second, and please forgive me, you either are schizophrenic or you're not honest. Okay? That's the extreme. Of course, in real life, it's a little more complicated. Okay? Let's not be naive either. But let's assume here that norms, which usually play a role, in this particular case do not play a role. So again, let's ignore them. So close to 0. So what is left is only this L. And L, legality, is internally what I call corporate governance rules in an organization, as well as externally the enforcement of rules. Now, and this is what's going on today. If I look at L here, and I use red color, how do I, very simplified, how do I express this? L here. L is the probability you get caught by the police as a result of a bribe. You multiply that with the probability you get prosecuted by the prosecutor, and then you multiply that with the probability to get penalized in court. Now let's do the exercise. Indonesia, Australia, okay? Or China. What's the probability? And we don't talk about the petty corruption, okay? We don't talk about paying off the police officer for a violation, traffic violation. We're talking about business. We talk about multi-billion-dollar deals, right? So let me ask you, what's the probability in percentage that you think the police will catch that person? And remember, these people are smart, okay? What's the chance? 0.5%, 40. Okay, 10. Let's take a middle, like I'm trying to make compromises, right? So let's make it 20%. 20%. Once you get caught by the police, Indonesia, what's the chance you get effectively prosecuted? 1%. No. Meaning you have money to pay off the prosecutor, right? That's the point. And that's effectively, that's what's happening. How much? 5 to, okay, let's make it even 10% for sake of calculations. But it's on the high side. Okay, you get prosecuted. What's the chance you get effectively penalized in court? Well, there's some judges who are honest. Let's make it 10, let's make it even 20%. Okay? Make it even 20%, which is a high side. Isn't there anybody who can do very fast calculation for me? 0.2 multiplied by 0.0, multiplied by 0.2. How much is that? 0.4. Now what does that mean? It's basically less as, well, it's basically less than 1%. So here is the point, and please remember for the rest of your life. It is irrational not to bribe in those countries. Why? Because the chance you get you really effectively penalized is less than 1%.
Yes. You haven't talked about the legal system of the sponsor country, for example, the US.
Yeah, that complicates the matter. FCPA, correct. That's true. That's true. I'll talk to that in a minute. But let me just do Australia now, just briefly. Australia, how much is the chance you get caught in Australia? 50. The police is not that smart. No, a little bit higher. No, okay, 30%, fine. Now, here is the thing. Once you get caught by the police in Australia, how much is the chance you get effectively prosecuted?
25.
That's it?
No, well,
80?
75.
Okay, make it 70. Or 5, make it 6. Effectively penalized according to the law. Ooh, you've good lawyers in this country. Make it 90 or 80. Make it 80. How much is that? 0.3 multiplied by 0.6 multiplied by 0.8. How much is that? Ooh, you're really mathematicians here. How much? Point double.
Double 162.
Double
Point 162.
So 0.04, is that it? Yeah, round figure. No, it should be more. 6.6. 60%, 30%. It's higher. 0.6? 1.6.
162.
Okay, 162. Fine. It means even if I make this a bit higher here, so meaning 1 in 5 or 16 to 20% chance you get penalized. You will think twice in this country to bribe. Now, and that's the right issue you brought up. Indeed, with FCPA and the British Corruption Act, it's much more tough for an Australian and or a Western country to bribe. But being in business, it still happens. Meaning, third party, they will never do it themselves. By standards of convention and FCPA, even if you get caught and a third party is doing it on your behalf, you don't get off the hook. That's correct.
But if you get caught in the country, that's not the critical issue for a Westerner. The Westerner is worried about whether you get caught with their own organisation, their own culture.
Yes and no, because if you get caught in China, which happened with Rio Tinto, the law is not the rule of law, it's the rule by law. Meaning the politicians or the state can use that against you because they won't give a lesson, in this case to Rio Tinto. And so then it's a different matter. It's not about the application and enforcement of the law.
Under UK AB, the Anti-Bribery Act and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, if you're an American and you're paying bribes in another country, and you could be sanctioned or in prison.
Yes.
It's the same thing with the UK Anti-Bribery Act, which is much more
Strict.
Worrying.
Yeah, it is. It's extremely strict.
Yeah.
Yeah, but until today, I don't think there was any case yet under the British, or the FCPA, yes, but not under the British Corruption Act. I think that was 2012. The new rule, the new law. But anyway, it is more strict, and I hope. Yeah. Okay. Okay. You may hope that there will be less corruption, but unfortunately, the World Bank is estimating.
It's a cash cow for both governments.
Yes.
That's what it's about. They can give a crap about who's getting paid off.
Yeah.
It's a parking ticket.
This is why we brought him in from New York. That's very good. I'll just, can I just say, for this board, you're very welcome to look at it if you can work out what it means.
Pretty hard to see.
I'll mail it.
Just Marcus, if you wanted to ask a question.
It's nice to see this sort of replay of Gary Becker's equations of marriage. However, that was a quasi-static equation.
No, I know.
If you deal with this by using time lags, then in that case the accountability also deteriorates. There are also two other factors that really modify this substantially. One of which could be, how can I put this politely, excessive funds donated to political parties, which can cause changes in the law. The second factor being the scale of the entity involved, which is mysteriously related to the former. Now, if those factors were included, you did a probabilistic analysis, I'd be a little bit more convinced.
Thank you. No, you're right. I just wanted to simplify the matter in saying that I believe that the law is not enforced as it should be if you add additional variables and factors, of course, definitely. And that's what we do at corporate governance at IFC. The whole issue within organizations only is, okay, a board member is responsible and accountable. If that would be applicable to the government official as well in the same way as corporations, then we may have an improvement as well, in addition to what you just mentioned. Yes?
But the critical factor of the other balance is the transparency factor.
Yeah.
And the transparency of political donations has been steadily embraced.
Yes.
And the reporting of corporate results has mysteriously become somewhat more complicated. I cannot think why.
Yeah. I fully agree. That's what I call the secrecy. The basic issue of corruption is a secrecy, and that's indeed the anti-transparency issue. Yes. Thank you.
Can I go to the left?
Yes, please.
I want you to say, to reduce corruption, you were asked to name 3 major changes you would make here in Australia. We've got some control over it. But here, what you would
So the question is, what would be 3 recommendations to reduce corruption in Australia? That's correct? Gosh, you put me on the stands indeed. Australia, compared to a lot of other countries, is functioning quite well in terms of institutions. In fact, again, corporate governance, which I'm more familiar with, we use Australian standards as an example in Southeast Asia at IFC World Bank. So, in theory, Australia is doing pretty well in terms of institutional guidelines. The issue for me is, and as I'm trying to answer the question, I'm not sure to what extent institutional reform can help. I guess it does, especially at government official or at institutional state level. But I think corporations are extremely cynical, especially if you're big. And if you deal with the Chinese, they've learned to deal with this kind of, as I called earlier, ambiguous practices. I think it all boils down to the belief at the top of an organization, whether that's a state or a private for-profit organization, meaning if you believe that honesty, accountability, transparency, responsibility, fairness, or values that you feel are appropriate and to be adhered to, then I guess that's the antipode for corruption. In fact, if we all would be saints, we don't need law. But unfortunately, we are not saints. So, trying to answer the question there, first is increased accountability, both in corporations as in state organizations. You asked me 3, right? I would give a lot of them for Indonesia, but I'm not so sure.
Could I just come in?
Yep.
Let's have with political donations.
Okay.
We find out 18 months after the donation who was given it to whom. Today we should, electronically, it would be possible to know today who has given money. Does that improve the situation?
Yeah, I think the internet and the whole, I mean, in business, Airbnb, and you just name a few. We were speaking about it before the lecture. The internet will automatically improve transparency. Businesses cannot, I mean, there are big departments in big organizations who are monitoring what's going on Twitter, on Facebook. You just keep on going. Telstra is one of those. So you cannot anymore ignore the power of reputational effects that are caused by multimedia and whatsoever, rightfully or not, wrongfully maybe, but you cannot ignore that. So indeed, if donations, charity, quote unquote, which are ambiguous, as I did establish earlier, right, for political gain or personal gain, if indeed it's dodgy and it becomes transparent because you can see who did donate and how much and so on, then I guess the reputational effect, that same thing there, will start to play an effect and make them more accountable. In fact, one of the big issues in Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries is exactly that. There is no ruling, there's no particular understanding of, or sorry, there is an understanding, but there's no rule for political donations. And that is causing a lot of problems with the present president in Indonesia, for example. So in that sense, yes, fully agree. Internet and a lot of those instruments will definitely, I think, improve the transparency and therefore accountability. And therefore, it will have an effect on the reputation of those individuals and organizations. Yes, please.
Rostar Howe, thank you very much for this. I've enjoyed it immensely, even without the other iterations that might have been made in a lunchtime speech on consent. I'd like you to just talk to that formula a little bit more, because there's a narrative or discourse in Australia about naughty Asians who are the ones who accept bribes, whereas Transparency International have what they call a bribe payers index, and it is the Australians who figure in this region as the payers of bribes. Now that might be new information to you, I'm not sure, but it suggests that our legal system, despite the OECD Convention and some others, that our legal system might not be as rigorous as you estimate.
Thank you. So the question is, to what extent, or to do with Australians paying...
How are we able to sustain this narrative that it's not the Asians who are the problem, when in fact the evidence shows that it's us?
All right. You turn it all around here. The fact that you have a briber and a bribee, meaning somebody who gives and somebody who receives, it's that kind of provocative statement that I sometimes uses. Who is to be blamed more, the one who sins for pay or the one who pays for sin? I believe that Australia has better systems, institutionally speaking, as Indonesia and other Asian countries. Having said that, that doesn't mean that Australians are morally superior, that's a little bit what you're implying, than, let's say, Asians. For me, the issue is, if you do business, we have to make the distinction between an outright bribe in order to influence the decision power of the one who will favor or not favor you, whether it's a tender process or whatever it is. That's one. There is also something like extortion. If you are importing or exporting from Australia to Indonesia or Thailand and you don't pay at the customs, your containers will not be cleared, and if they are perishable goods, you know, after 2 weeks, your container is worth nothing. So what do you do? Extortion. There's also something like grease and facilitating payments, which is allowed under FCPA, not under the UK Bribery Act. Some organizations will use that. So again, we have to distinguish, that's a major difference to be made, extortion versus outright bribery where you're trying to influence. I suspect a lot of the so-called bribes are from an or kind of extortion payments where the Australians may not like to pay, but in order to carry on the business, they have no choice. But I guess there may be people who say, listen, do like the Romans do in Rome. I mean, if that's what it needs to be done to get the business, I'm not the proponent of that, because your reputation may be damaged, and I'd rather be a poor man. I'd rather be a poor Socrates than be a rich prisoner. But that's my opinion. That doesn't mean that. So I'm not sure about the facts in terms of how many Australians would do it. I'm not sure. I think the fact that the penalties are high in Australia if you get caught is definitely something that may scare them off.
Thank you. One more question from David. I'm sorry. He had,
sorry.
had that in, and then
sorry.
the closing address. No,
Yes.
no.
Mine was just, I tried to read your book, The Ambiguity of the Gift, and I found it really, really difficult. But this was a fantastic presentation, and now I'm beginning to understand it. So I'll find the copy and I'll start to continue reading it. That's what I wanted to say. So it's a very, very good book. It's really good. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, David.